Hey, Kristin, very nice to meet you. And thank you for joining today to take part in a quick discussion slash interview slash conversation, right? Um, my name is Gokul, and I am the head of solution engineering here at Katalon. So very nice to meet you. We've heard a lot of good things about you in the industry, and we wanted to take the pleasure of talking to you and getting your perspective on things that have been happening in the test automation, testing world, and kind of get your perspective on things, right? So very nice to meet you. I also have Armando from our product marketing team at Katalon. I'll let him introduce himself. We'll go from there.
Hello, Kristin. Hello, everybody. Armando Wirshing. Come from the world of DevOps, both as a vendor and as an implementer, and very familiar with that space, very familiar with QA as a practice and partnering with that practice from a developer perspective. So that's just a brief history of me, and we'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Kristin, if you wanted to quickly, just tell us about yourself, that would, give the audience a, holistic view of what you've done, your accomplishments, and, where, I know you've written a book recently, so, a little bit on that would be great.
Okay, well, hello, and thank you for having me. So my name is Kristin Jackvony, and I am currently the principal engineer for quality at Paylocity, which is an HR and payroll software company. And I've been involved in software testing since 2009. Before that, I had a completely different career as a choir director and a music teacher. And it was in 2009 that I discovered my love for software testing. And I said, I never want to do anything else but this. And I have recently written a book called The Complete Software Tester, which includes all kinds of things that I have learned over my years as a tester. And it covers a lot of different topics, from manual testing to API testing to test automation, to programming basics and writing test plans and soft skills and much, much more.
That is awesome. Great to know. And I think one of the things even our CEO talks about is the love for testing, right? And I think that's common in all of us in the call today as well. We all love the test group and the test automation group, because I think that's one of the most underrepresented communities in the tech space, I would say, right? And I want to have a place where we can talk about the empowerment of the community overall, and also make sure we are bringing people to light and visibility. That's the goal of this. This is not to portray any kind of solution. It's just to talk about in general what are the things that works and could be improved on. If you could help us give a little bit more idea how you got to build your book, right? That would really help us. How did you get that idea to, first of all, think about a book, and what's your journey in that?
Sure thing. So in 2012, I believe it was, I was hired at a company where they wanted me to do test automation. And up until that point, I had been a manual tester. I knew nothing about test automation. I just had a few programming courses to sort of guide me. And so I was trying to figure out how to do test automation. And as I was figuring things out, I thought, gosh, it shouldn't be this hard. There should be ways for people to learn about this that don't involve, extensive Google searches and frustration. So I started a blog. So I initially started the blog both to help other people who were trying to get into test automation, and also to help myself, because every time I needed to stand up a new project, I had to remember what it was that I did. So I went back to my blog to learn what it was that I had done. And I started to write in it more consistently in about 2017. And I was writing regularly, and I eventually realized I had so many different posts on so many different testing related topics that I thought that it was time to put it in a book. So that's what I did. I took a number of those blog posts, I organized them in book form, I revised them, and made them into something more cohesive.
That is fantastic. How's the reception been so far for the book?
It's been good so far. The book came out about 2 months ago, and I've been mentioning it at conferences and on podcasts, and so I'm starting to generate some buzz. I have some nice reviews on there, which I'm really excited about.
That is awesome. It's a great journey, and what you've gone through, and we're really appreciative of that. I think Armando has the next question for you, right?
I did, but as you know, I want to keep this kind of fluid, and so we might get back to that question, but I'm going to jump in real quick. I did get a chance to go out and read one of the reviews, and one of the things that I remember one of the reviewers talking about was how valuable the book was to them with respect to growing a QA team, right, and having something to hand over that as you obviously in this day and age, technical expertise, especially in a QA world, is limited. There's a small pool of good testers, especially automation testers out there. Can you talk a little bit about what the book offers to either the manager, or maybe how the manager can use your book to help a tester kind of level up or just get started? If it could be fresh out of college or a technical school. Talk a little bit about that, because that comment in that review was interesting to me.
Absolutely, sure. So I am a big proponent in what I call full stack testers. And that's a tester that understands not just interacting with the UI of the application, but being able to interact with the API, if there's an underlying API below the application, and also just understanding how to do things like do a pull request for shared versioning and be able to make changes and then submit those, and be able to use the command line, be able to use database tools like SQL or like MongoDB. And so the book really has a number of different sections where any tester who is missing certain skills could go directly to that section and have sort of a get started guide in every single one of those areas. And so one thing that a manager could do with a book like this is they could just point the tester who wants to grow their skills to those specific areas of the book. And then another thing that I think is very useful is I've got a large section about just test planning and test strategy. A lot of times, because software testing isn't really taught in terms of it's not taught in colleges generally. I mean, there's software developers who learn programming skills, but nobody's teaching the software testers. And so a lot of people who go into testing or management or development don't really understand the logical skills required to decide, what should I be testing here? What are my biggest areas of risk? How do I want to test them? How often do I want to test them? And so that section, I think, will be really helpful for everybody.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit, dive into process a little bit. That's kind of my bad habit, I guess, or where I tend to spend a lot of time is just the idea, the concepts of process. And, over the past, let's call it decade or so, and the decade before that as well, with the growth of agile development, and then rolling that into DevOps, and the evolution of DevOps, and as more organizations start rolling that out, you obviously have this kind of Moore's law of software development happening, right, over the past. So you've got so much change, so much capability for software teams to put out more change. And of course, with QA, the more the changes, the more you want to test, more you want to do. You've had terms like dev test ops, right? Or test ops, or something to imply how to evolve testing in this world of rapid change, rapid release. Can you talk just a little bit in general about that? Your thoughts on that, kind of how different QA teams can evolve to support DevOps teams, and more importantly, kind of merge into part of the DevOps process?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with you that things have changed tremendously just since I first started doing software testing. One of the earliest companies that I worked for was I didn't even know what Agile was at the time, and they had not yet made that transition into Agile. And so it was a very waterfall model where the developers would create this, would execute on the stories. They do the coding for the stories, and then the testers would test those stories. And then there'd be sort of like this big release built up where the testers were doing lots and lots of manual testing before the release. And today that is just not possible. Today, teams are releasing software probably every 2 weeks. And it's just not possible for manual testers to keep up with that kind of pace. And that's where test automation comes in. And something else that I think is very important is that the tester on the team, let's say there's just one tester on the team, they cannot be the bottleneck, not only for manual testing, but also for test automation. They can't be the only person on the team that knows how the automation works and how to fix it, because then they are going to wind up becoming the bottleneck. They're going to be the ones that are up at 11:30 at night doing testing for the release or debugging the automation. What we need to have is we need to have the entire team own the testing, take responsibility for the testing. Developers need to understand what's happening in the test automation, how they can contribute to it, either by adding new tests or by updating existing tests if functionality has changed. And they need to understand how to solve, debug any kinds of testing problems, how to be able to figure out, is the test failing because it's a flaky test, or is the test failing because it's pointing to a legitimate problem that needs to be looked at? And I'm really excited about integrating testing into DevOps and having that CI/CD kind of flow, because it makes everybody's life easier. Nobody has to be up at 11:30 at night watching the deployment. You've got the tests that can alert you to the fact that something is wrong. So I think that's a really positive direction, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next there.
Cool. I guess in the same context, right? There seems to be a numerous number of tools in the ecosystem, that have removed your technical blockers per se. But what do you think is like the next major challenge that testers are facing beyond solutions, beyond tools, right? What do you think is the biggest challenge that testers are facing in automated testing?
I think I sort of touched on that. It's getting the whole team involved. I think that's the most important thing that needs to happen next. I think that sometimes there are testers who are afraid that if they get the whole team involved, that then there won't be enough for them to do. And that is so not the case, because software is always going to be buggy. And testers are always going to be needed to be thinking about what should be tested and what the best strategy is for that testing. So what they will find is, as they get cooperation from developers on their team to perhaps help set up a new testing framework, or to maybe refactor so that there's more reliability, whatever they can do, that's going to free up the tester to be able to think more creatively about the full health of the application. And that's, again, why I like to think of full stack testers, because a tester who is not bogged down with checking to make sure that their automation is really working and not flaky and trying to figure out what's going on, they have more free time to think about the performance of the application. They have more free time to think about the security concerns of the application. So to have the whole team involved really sets the groundwork for a much more robust and stable application.
That is great. On that same lines, do you think people have the skills? And is there any kind of training that's required? I know you have written a book. That's great, right? I think that's a first step for someone to learn. But is there anything that's missing in that overall learning journey today? Is there a gap that you think, someone should fill in that learning space?
Well, I have definitely aimed to start filling that gap with my book, that's for sure. One of the things that I really tried to do with my book is to provide people with tools and terminology so that if they want to go further, they can do web searches to get more information. What I found when I was a brand new tester is that there was something I wanted to do, but I had trouble searching for how to do it because I didn't know the words for what that was. Yeah. So I really hope that each of the sections of my book will be that sort of jumping off point. But I'll also say, we live in a wonderful time where the testing community is just getting more vibrant all the time. And there are so many resources. There are so many organizations, great online conferences. I've just participated in 2 of those in the last 2 weeks. There's tools that provide free courses, and that's extremely helpful. So I think the biggest thing that we need for testers to understand that they need to be doing more than just clicking buttons in the application in the case of people who are very manual focused. And but we also need testers who are doing more than just writing test automation without thinking about the application as a whole. And so once testers on both sides of that issue can realize that they need to have some more development, then they can go out and they can get a lot of free or low cost resources to help them grow.
That is amazing.
So the growth, the learning, how you adapt as a tester, or more importantly, as a test team nowadays, because no one tester can do it all. From a DevOps perspective, one of the things that we highlight there when we're talking to customers or in my previous lives with consulting with them is information, right? What's the right information, and at what time is the information valuable or best to have to perform certain tasks? So in the testing world, right, we've got what should I create tests for, right? And how do I make sure that they are the right tests? And then you've got the operational maintenance side of, okay, what tests need to be looked at after a couple of weeks, a couple months and stuff. Could you talk a little bit about what you've done in the past, or more recently, how you've seen change, any tools in particular, or just what kind of metrics you use to measure and act on those two sides, the creation and the maintenance side?
Okay. Well, one thing that I've definitely been working on in my current position is making sure that people are not over testing. It's important that you have tests that ensure that there's been no regressions when you do a deployment, for example. But you don't necessarily have to have that test every single possible permutation under the sun. So here's an example from one particular team. They had a series of regression tests that were UI automation, and they ran for 8 hours. And that unfortunately was not actionable enough to the people that needed those results. The developers who were pushing the code needed to get results faster than that. And so that's definitely one thing that we look at. We also look at time to deployment. The more teams have been adopting good quality practices, the more they've been able to deploy more quickly. So that's definitely a metric we take a look at. Another thing that I think is important to think about just in general quality of an application is monitoring and alerting and logging. And you want those things to be like more is not necessarily better. Sometimes less is more. If you have logging and with every action you get 5,000 lines of logs, but you really only need to have like two of those lines that provide you with actionable information, you got to find a way to pare that down. And then also with monitoring and alerting, those are both really, really wonderful things, but you need to be careful not to have people develop alert fatigue. If you have alerting set up where if the slightest thing goes wrong, like let's say, I don't know, a notification needs to be retried or something like that, and everybody gets alerted on that, they're going to start ignoring the alerts. So you have to figure out how to strike the right balance between wanting to make sure that people see that something's going wrong without waking them up in the middle of the night for something that happened in the QA environment that nobody needs to know about right now.
Yeah. Just digging down deeper on your first point, right? I think you mentioned an interesting point around coverage or finding the best path to test. How do you know that? Is that through experience, or maybe something's helping you do that, but or maybe a process within the organization? What really contributes to finding my top test cases to test against?
That's a great question. I think that I will illustrate with an example that happened at a company that I was working at many years ago. We had, and actually this was the same company where we were all manual testers and we were in a waterfall kind of mode. So there was so much for us to test because this was a very extensive and versatile product that we were missing things. And then there was one day where we discovered that a key feature of our application had been broken for several weeks and none of us noticed because none of us had been testing it. And so that's when I learned the importance of having a smoke test. What you need to do when you're thinking about a smoke test is think about what are the things that if they were broken, this would absolutely embarrass us as a company and would be very detrimental. So an example of that would be if you have an e-commerce app, you want to make sure that your user can check out, because if they can't check out, then there's sort of no reason to have the e-commerce app. So we went through and we came up with a list of the most crucial features, and we came up with a smoke test. It was a manual smoke test, and all of us would run that smoke test. This was a mobile platform, so we all had a different mobile device, and we would all run through the smoke test. But what happened after that was whenever we missed a bug, somebody was adding in another step to the smoke test, even if it was a very small bug, even if it was a bug that only affected one of our customers. And the smoke test got longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer until pretty soon it took like the whole day to run the smoke test. So I think the most important thing to think about with your test strategy is what's that key functionality that if you don't have, if this was broken, then it would be very, very bad for everyone. And then from there, I think the next level would be to move into the happy path scenarios. For example, I'm a huge proponent of API testing. I love API testing, and I think it is so valuable. So the next step for me would be to think about those API endpoints and making sure that you're hitting every single one of those API endpoints with a positive request, like a GET request that you would expect would return results, that kind of thing. And then from there, then you want to move into things like the negative cases, security holes, adding in those kinds of layers. So I think it needs to be sort of a logical process that you can do. And it's important to have other people to bounce those ideas off of to make sure that you're going down the right logical path.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that. And I think it shows the experience and the breadth that you bring, right? I think speaks to your stories that you have, what you've worked on, all of that. So thank you. In terms of just, automation tools in the market, there is a large percentage of still manual testing going on, right? There's a lot of people who are still completely manual shops. We talk to a lot of customers on a day-to-day basis. What do you think is a sustainable percentage of automation for organizations in today's world, maybe 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What do you think that journey is going to look like?
Well, I don't think that I can put a specific percentage because I think it's going to vary by application and also by platform. So I would say right now, there's still a whole lot of manual testing going on in the mobile space. I think probably more than most people would like to admit is happening. So I think in terms of that, I think there's still going to be a fair amount of mobile testing happening there. I think in some more mature platforms that have been around longer, your simple, adding like address book, that kind of level of a simple product, I think there's space for much more automation there. And then tools have been developed to do things like visual validation or even accessibility auditing through automated testing, which are so helpful. So I think in those cases, I think the amount of manual testing can be drastically reduced. With that said, I'm also a huge proponent of exploratory testing. I think there is nothing like a pair of eyeballs and a pair of hands to go ahead and tap on things, do unexpected things, just look for odd things that the automation might have missed. So I think there will always be a little bit of that component, but the wonderful thing about test automation is that the more high quality, fast running, actionable test automation you have in place, the more you are free to think about what's going on with my application. Is there something that I haven't thought of? Is there an interaction that I've missed? And then you can do that exploratory testing.
That is great.
Yeah, that's great. Well, along those lines, so not to put a number per se to manual testing, but in general of looking at the maturity of a QA team, right? What would be a good way to you have capability maturity model, all these other ways of looking at it, but more kind of in the weeds, implementer, user, person from the QA world. If you're looking across companies and you're saying, wow, that's really defined, they are way ahead of the curve, and here's they're just starting their journey. What would be those two ends, and what would be maybe something in the middle? Just, off the top of your head.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think probably the lowest level would be the team where they've got one or two manual testers, and that's all they do. It's just the manual testing, and the developers aren't really even writing unit tests. They're not really even thinking about testing. They just figure they're going to have those manual testers just check to make sure that it's working. I think that's probably like the beginning point. That's probably where like companies I was with, 10 years ago were. Yeah. So I think a good next step would be to start having that test automation. But another common mistake is to hire somebody on as an automation engineer who doesn't actually understand the application or really what to test. And I've seen this before too. Very interesting. At my company, of course, we like to hire software testers, and we like to hire very talented software testers who can both find bugs and can also automate, so that there's that regression testing in place. And so one of the first things we ask them to do is we give them a buggy application, and we ask them to find bugs. And it's astounding the number of applicants that we get who cannot find bugs. They're applying to be software testers, but what they really are is they're coders. They know how to write code to do stuff, but they don't know how to find bugs in the application, and they don't know how to think about the application.
That's a really smart way, right? To interview candidates and find find if you can actually do the manual exploratory testing and find the bugs, right?
Yeah. We weed out a lot of candidates with that. But so that's sort of like the next level is, okay, maybe you've got a manual tester and an automation tester, but the automation tester doesn't really know how to think about the application as a whole and doesn't know how to make decisions about what to test. So then I would say the next level up is now you've got testers who understand what to test in the application and the best ways to automate it. But then we can still go one level above that, which is that the whole team gets involved. This is where the developers are helping with the testing by, for one thing, thinking outside the box, thinking how their module is going to interact with somebody else's module. They're doing things like creating test harnesses for the testing team to use to make their job easier. They're contributing to test automation. They're helping with refactoring of test automation, because developers often understand more about clean code than testers do. Not all the time, but I know for myself, I started out in the music field. I wasn't studying software development. And I know other great testers who were French majors or history majors. Yeah. And so to have the developers help out with the quality of the code is also very important. So I think that's really the ultimate level, is where you've got the whole team working together to own quality and to own that automation and make it just as important as the code.
Great. That's a great answer. Let me ask a follow-up to that. Looking into the future, right? Lots of tools out there, adding in features around AI and machine learning. From your experience, to me, the value of AI is reducing toil, right? Churn work, and letting the testers, the valuable folks, focus on the new stuff, the innovative things that need to be tested, new ways or new features that need to be tested in a different way or something. Looking at the market of tools that are coming out in the AI, where do you think AI might play a good part and the most beneficial part in testing operations?
Well, I think what we've seen so far is that we're starting to get those self-healing tests is what they're called, where let's say you've got an element on the page and like a button or something, and you're sort of reusing the button in a bunch of different places, and then that button gets renamed to something else, that the tests can detect whether that button has been renamed and adjust accordingly, so that now it recognizes, oh, that's the button now, and makes that change. I'd really like to see, going forward, I'd like to see some more of that in API testing and automation, where the tests could, pull down the latest schema and be able to adjust the tests accordingly. I mean, when you come down to it, a lot of operations, API related operations, come down to like the basic CRUD, your create, read, update, and delete. And so if AI automation could account for changes in that schema, that would be really great. I've also been very interested in the visual testing and the applications that can learn when they're doing visual comparisons. You can say, okay, I don't need you to compare pixel by pixel. I just need you to be smart here and figure out that this is mostly looking like this. And they can make that determination. So I think those are some areas that would be really exciting to see the changes.
Awesome. Great feedback. Thank you.
I guess, we are heading towards the last parts of the interview, more conversation. I think we had a fantastic, back and forth. So thank you for that. What do you think is the number one challenge in testing with the evolution of applications? You have microservices, serverless applications coming in, containerized applications, right? So, as the applications evolve and the architectures evolve, what do you think is like the number one challenge there?
I think the number one challenge is training good testers. As I mentioned before, I mean, testing is not like you can't major in testing in college. You can't say, oh, I want to be a software tester, so that's going to be my major. And a lot of people, I was astounded. This was a few years ago. I went to a conference and I met a young woman who was a software developer, and she said, oh, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a software tester. And she said, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I was really surprised. So I think there are a lot of people out there when they discover software testing as a discipline, they get very, very excited about it. And I think that we need to be able to provide testers with as many tools as we can so that they can continue to level up their skills and adopt and grow with those new technologies. So, perfect example would be going from a relational database to a non-relational database. Some of the things that you know about relational databases when you test them are quite different when you're working with a non-relational database. So testers need to be able to have that growth mindset and see what's coming down the pike, be able to find the resources that they need to learn about those new technologies, and then grow and then be able to share with others what they've learned.
Awesome. That's great feedback. And I think learning is part of everyone's journey, including me. I talk to a lot of customers every day in my job, and it's not new, right? Everyone's having a different scenario. Everyone's in a different maturity curve. So it's great. Learning is number one. Any last comments for the broader testing community before we end the call, right?
Yes, buy my book. It's called The Complete Software Tester, and you can find it on Amazon. Currently, there is just an electronic edition through Kindle. A lot of people don't know that you can read a Kindle book without owning a Kindle. The Kindle application is available on tablet and smartphone and your laptop. So all you need to do is get that Kindle app, which is free, and then you can order my book and you can read my book, and then you can learn all kinds of new things.
Yeah, and awesome. We'll be sure to post a link to it somewhere, either here, or in the comments below, depending on where we put this out on. We'll put a link out to the book there so everybody has a chance to go take a look at it.
Kristin, anyone else that, you feel like, again, this is probably out of scope of the conversation, but anyone else you feel like, it would be nice to create a series around that? I'm sure you have connections in the testing industry, and there are people like you doing a lot of wonderful work. We would love to connect with other people.
Sure. Yeah, I can make you a list of people.
Awesome. That would be fantastic.
That would be good to interview. Yeah.
Yeah, and just for the community, right? It's more than I think we learned a lot during the conversation. We didn't talk about any kind of technology. It's more about your experience and trying to learn from experience, right? I think so. If you can give us a list, then we'll make a series out of it, and help impact the broader community. So thank you so much for the time.